Well, good evening, everyone. Is my mic live? I'd like to welcome everyone to the Sanford's third annual, what's now become an annual housing workshop. I thank everybody for coming tonight and your participation in the event. This forum is going to be a little different than the first two. We're going to spend less time in summarizing all areas of work across our providers or agencies in lieu of a more general overview of the major elements impacting the development of housing, as well as those elements impacting the housing of people. So even though this isn't about the homeless, we're going to do a homeless forum separate from this. I found in preparing the timeline and the materials, I just could not talk about housing without addressing the unhoused at the same time, right? Because it's one and the same. So our agenda tonight is, again, we're going to spend less time in presentation and greater focus on an interactive format to address questions and provide input for solutions around housing development and housing people. So we will open it up to the audience that's here this evening, ask you to ask us questions, and that will engage us in a dialogue with all of our partners that are sitting around the table here this evening, and we'll try our best to address those questions. So present tonight, we have city departments, we have agencies, authorities, and service providers, and private developers and realtors to address questions and provide answers that you may have from the audience and that we may be asking ourselves so that we can figure out a future pathway forward. So Erin Moriarty, our planner, is working on our new comp plan. She has a comp planning committee. Some of the information she'll be presenting to you tonight is from a market analysis that's being produced by RKG. It's fascinating information. So she's looking for the input from this process tonight as well to put into our comp plan. So I'm going to start off with a timeline this evening, which is focused on the housing and housing of people. We'll then ask our codes and planning departments to provide an impression of who is developing and the what, as well as how the state's desire for more housing density through zoning is working. Our Growth Council will present on the work on the housing as it relates to economic development. And we have a local developer here this evening that will give us his impressions of what's going on for the work that he's doing here. Then we'll ask our mayor, will comment and introduce, will comment on the city council's goals, and then introduce a presenter that will present on the ALISH report. So we'll wait on that acronym. You learned what the ALISH report is. It's fascinating information. And then we'll engage in a question and answer session. So again, I thank everybody for their contributions that they're going to be making this evening. Our city is fortunate, and we rely heavily on the extraordinary partnerships that we have and all of the people sitting around this table this evening. So with that, I'll start off with just a brief historical timeline of why we have a focus on housing to the extent that we do. Oh, I already had that open, didn't I? Sorry. Okay, on screen. So starting in 2012, we were working on the municipal budget, and there was dialogues via the budget process around the impacts of housing. So we'd observed an extraordinary number of special needs students. We'd observed free lunch programming and other aspects. And so we started to take a deep dive into our housing stock. And what we found in that first year of looking at this was that a third of our residents live in rentals, not dissimilar from any other large city such as ourselves. But the thing that we did find is when we amalgamated all of those rental units, it only comprised 11% of our taxable base. So a third of our population lived in rental units that comprised 11% of our taxable base. The average age of 78% of those units was 1908. So it had been stick-built homes for the mills industry that was here. It had been converted to rentals and other forms. And that the average value per unit was just $43,000. And at that time, the single-family residentials made up 68% of our taxable base. So the year prior to that, there was a 10% increase in taxation. I started in that year. People were coming into the office at a regular pace, saying, I'm seeing a 15, 16% increase. No, it was 10%. No, here's my bill. Yep, you're right. So then when I started to drill down, you could quickly find that there's an overburden of taxation on the single-family residential home because it was a majority of your taxable base. And there's other portions of the tax base that weren't paying their fair share. So that went on for a series of a few years, and in 2016, the City Council put a focus on community development. They created the position of community development with a specific focus to start addressing the aged housing stock. They did an examination of codes and staffing, did an examination of the age and condition of the housing stock, and they recognized a large number of deficient rentals in units that were subject to poor stewardship. Budget and programs began pending at that point in time to address. Also in that year, the city, recognizing that it needed to do anything and everything that it could, it began to partner for using tax increment financing. We did a presentation on that this year, not going to focus it there, but we used tax increment financing for the first time on the St. Ignatius project. So that was an actual housing TIF. We put that in place to redevelop the former high school and add an addition to that. And also in that same year, we did the first economic tax increment financing district around residential development. That was Marlin Hall, one of the dormitories associated with Nassau Community College, and it was 55 plus. And we were one of the first in the state to use an economic TIF towards housing. That set a format and a template that we now use for future TIF considerations moving forward. By 2017, a land bank was formed. We had the first land bank, which established to address dangerous and hazardous housing. The rental registration program was established. The vacant building registration program was established. We hired 2 additional code officers to implement the increased inspections and to increase safer, fairer housing for all in the community. To date, we've addressed 92 properties via that program, with more forthcoming. By 2019, we established the Homeless Task Force. I can go back in my notes prior to that and see the dialogues and the discussions that we were having in the police department. My goodness, we see as many as 15 people that are unhoused outside in our community. 15 people. Today, that would just be an enormous victory. Anyway, so by 2019, we established a Homeless Task Force. The partners of that task force was the police, the general assistance, Sanford Housing, York County Shelter Program, York County Community Action Corporation, Nassau Health, and a multitude of other service providers that were providing a continuum of services, care for those that were unhoused. We established the first resource hub that was at York County Community Action's parking lot, and we began the discussion of establishing a mental health unit within the police department. Also in 2019, we started to increase our partnership with the Sanford Housing Authority. Via that partnership, we did cooperative inspections on rental units that were subject to vouchers. We did rehabilitation of distressed properties using housing neighborhood stabilization funds. And we addressed the unhoused and via housing navigation and other mechanisms. By 2020, we had increased the partnerships. COVID was a driver of that starting out. York County Community Action Corporation, York County Shelter Program, Sanford Housing, General Assistance, and others. We were there to provide emergency housing needs for those individuals during COVID. There was a lot of federal dollars put towards that. We started to look at the coordination of case management and housing navigation, and we increased the coordination of all through the creation of the Homeless Task Force. We began to strengthen that. Also in 2020, the Police Mental Health Unit had been created, and the unit sought to expand and focus its efforts. We then had 2 full-time officers, and we had the first part-time options clinician, and started the dialogue and the hiring in 2021 of a full-time first responder clinician within the department. This is when the mental health unit was functioning primarily as the street outreach, and we know now that we desperately need street outreach workers, and we're seeking funding to accommodate that. But it was on the concentration of the unhoused and the connecting the resources that we were seeing that was ever more prevalent during COVID. In 2023, we had a new category. We had the new Mainers arrive here in our community. We had a large number of new Mainers arrive on a Friday afternoon. General assistance was closed, city office was closed, we had about 135 people land on our doorstep. And by 10 o'clock that night, because of the partners that were sitting here, by 10 o'clock that night, everybody was housed. It was an extraordinary effort. So that, again, strengthened our partnerships with all of our service providers. Again, York County Community Action Corporation, York County Shelter Program, Sanford Housing Authority, General Assistance, and for the first time, community volunteers. There was a tremendous organization of community volunteers, church groups, and others that came in to assist with the accommodation of the new Mainers. And again, we continued the conversation around coordinated case management, housing navigation to include rental inventory and the stacking of services. And the schools department started to take in a significant new number of students from the new Mainers. Also in 2023, the housing densities, LD 2003, Aaron will talk to us about some of those elements. The city incorporated those mandates of the state zoning changes. What we did note is we had the predominance of them already in our code book, but we had to adapt to the state's needs. And it looks at the accessory dwelling units, densities in the urban core and the growth area. And the city adopted the other density bonuses for creation of affordable housing and parking reductions. Right, Aaron? Parking reductions. That's a running joke here. Well, I know. In 2024, we were on the backside of some of the COVID impacts, but there was a significant number of people unhoused. We had the encampment closure off in Heritage Crossing. But before that, the city worked with its partners. We adopted the 19 strategies to address encampments as put forward by the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Again, the resource hub was stood up significantly to house all of those who would take services. From there, I note that 6 went to the shelter, 2 went into treatment, and 22 went into permanently housed situations. Also in 24, the Sanford Housing Authority, the city started working with the Housing Authority towards the establishment of 30 units of housing first at Heritage Crossing, the former encampment site. And that changed even tonight, didn't it, Diane? Yeah. Also working on 27 units of 55 plus workforce housing at the former Springville Courthouse. That's another significant venture to happen here in our city. And the examination of affordable daycare center. We were touring Lafayette School just yesterday, looking at the reuse of that structure. Also in 2024, the housing stats codes continues to hit records as far as the number of building permits and the units being created in our community. For the last number of years, I've sort of beat up Jamie Cole a little bit. Hey, these housing revenues are pretty significant. We can book some more revenue. Nope, the bubble's going to burst. It has not burst at this point. Then I note in pending development, the city and the sewer district have put out an RFP for the redevelopment of Stenton Trust. The Growth Council had a significant hand in that, getting that out to qualified developers, which I believe you're starting to get responses to already. And we're looking at the redevelopment of the trust building is on our horizon, and it will be a tax increment financing consideration of 36 new units from Robertson, Maine at the council meeting this coming Tuesday night. So the continuum of housing, creation, expansion, and housing of the unhoused, that's kind of the timeline and the partnerships that we've used. We continue those broad partnerships between the city and its agencies, and most importantly, the private developers here in our community. So hopefully you'll see tonight via the dialogue when we get to the Q&A that the city continues to explore all the options that are on the table. We like to think that we partner well with everybody, and it takes that continuum of everybody at the table in order to make this happen. So with that said, we're going to start a series of presentations here. The first will be an overview of municipal actions to date and to address the housing matters. I've done that. The strategic planning activities to encourage housing sustainability. So I'd ask Jamie Cole and Aaron to present on that next. Or is Jamie going first, or are you going first?
Does it matter? Okay, perfect. Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Erin Moriarty. I am the planner here for the City of Sanford. As Mr. Buck has mentioned, we did, in fact, implement the state-mandated updates put out by the LD 2003 legislation last year, the long title being Enact to Implement the Recommendations of the Commission to Increase Housing Opportunities in Maine by Studying Zoning and Land Use Restrictions. Ultimately, this legislation was meant to meet the statewide housing production goals and remove any unnecessary regulatory barriers to housing production while still maintaining the local ability to create land use plans and preserve sensitive environmental resources. If you were paying attention last year, some of these slides should look familiar, but we have updates coming. Ultimately, what this legislation means is that within the growth zone, any lot that was allowing single-family homes now allows up to 4 dwelling units and 2 dwelling units outside of that designated growth area. There are, however, some restrictions that still apply as far as overall densities if those are in place, which Sanford does have some in place. So as I mentioned, and Steve mentioned, we already had some of the mandated regulations in place here. We have a growth area in our outdated comprehensive plan from 2005. We will continue to have one moving forward as we continue to work on the update to the comprehensive plan. We already allowed accessory dwelling units under a different name, accessory apartments. We did have to update that ordinance slightly. All of our zones require setback and density standards for residential, which does play into the number of units you can fit onto a lot. And we have public utilities in certain areas which also can monitor and restrict capacity going towards our rural areas. We have in place a site plan review committee and subdivision review process through the site plan review committee and planning board. So there is a process there for evaluating subdivisions as they come through. And then of course we have a downtown area and an urban zone which welcomes a wide range of development. So Sanford's no stranger to having development happen. This is an image of the current growth area, designated growth area being in that kind of reddish pink color here. A portion of every single zone in Sanford exists within this growth area. So it was necessary for us to look at every regulation and zoning density and setback to see if we were still meeting the letter of the law as well as the intent. What happened is we basically combined our single-family residential zone with our residential development zone, because after comparing the two districts, we realized that the developmental standards were essentially the same, very similar in many cases, being the minimum lot size, the different setbacks. However, multifamily was not allowed in the single-family residential district, except that LD 2003 mandated it was allowed. So it felt a little bit disingenuous to call a zone single-family residential when in fact you could have up to 4 residential units if the lot was large enough. And being that the other density restrictions were similar to residential development, we combined those two zones, which ultimately led to a 5% increase in the total land area of Sanford, which now allows multifamily housing. You can see this is our zoning map from 2003 with the orange being the single family residential zone. It is now blue with the existing residential development zone here being combined for a total area moving forward. But that doesn't mean that you can fit 4 houses on every single lot in the residential development zone, because houses take space and so do all of these other restrictions. There are minimum lot sizes, maximum net densities, minimum parking requirements, maximum height restrictions, impervious cover calculations, and other land use restrictions such as shoreland, wetlands, and other natural habitats we have to take into account as well. So you can see that just by saying multifamily is allowed in the residential development zone, it does not mean that you can actually fit a multifamily apartment building in your backyard. As we move forward and are planning for the future, during the comprehensive planning process, we have contracted with a marketing consultant called RKG Associates. And they've basically kind of outlined for us some of the future prospects, not just for housing, but for jobs, growth, and other transportation, land development needs. But as far as housing goes, they've, projected our future population to be about 23,700, which would equate to approximately 717 new households by 2040. As you can see on the right here, the majority of land in Sanford is still rural residential. So if we look back at this, you can see that 83% of land area in Sanford allows single-family homes. Only 13% currently allows multifamily. The dark green out here is that rural residential zone, and that equates to 16,755 acres of land out of a total 30,000. So it's roughly half the land area in Sanford is zoned rural residential. RKG has made some case points as far as, is that the right amount of area that should be rural residential? Is 717 homes going to be enough? Are we attracting more jobs, which would then need more homes? But when you look at just the space required to accommodate those 717 homes, if everything were to go into that rural residential, just because that's where most of the land is already, we would be losing approximately 5% of the land area in Sanford currently, would just be used up by additional housing. If you were instead to incorporate all of those 717 homes on the minimum square foot lot for the residential development zone, it's 6,000 square feet, it would only take up 99 acres. So already you're cutting down significantly just by allowing for multifamily to occur. If you were to incorporate all of those homes in the urban zone with a very generous 2,000 square foot apartment size, you would only take up 33 acres, and quite honestly, much less than that, because that's assuming that all of those apartments are stacked up next to each other side by side and not stacked on top of each other like a typical apartment building. All told, though, you'd still only be using 0.1% of the land area in Sanford if you were to accommodate all of those projected 717 homes in the urban zone. But if you think that 700 homes sounds like a lot, just wait. Okay, so in general, in the United States, the population of the United States has been increasingly located in urban areas. So from 1790 to 2010, we've gone from about 5% located in the urban area to now 80% are living in an urbanized area. That said, Maine has historically been one of the least, if not the least, urban states in America at 38.6%, but things are changing. According to the plan, a different plan, not just our market analysis, but the state of Maine also did a thorough analysis called the State of Maine Housing Production Needs Study, which came out like weeks after our housing workshop last year was held. This was a combined effort of Maine Housing, the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, also known as GOPIF, and the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. This was put together by HRNA advisors and included a wide array of study as far as what Maine needs to move forward. This is dealing with the historic underproduction of homes in Maine that is caused by a number of things, including the Great Recession and the lack of housing that occurred after that housing bubble burst and people stopped going into trades, and so now we have a deficit of workers in the trades that can provide housing. We have the COVID supply delay that also caused a decrease in housing produced. And then we have an immigration of international and also just regional people that have been moving to Maine for a better quality of life. So we have currently a historic underproduction just in the coastal area, which is where Sanford falls, of 21,000 homes. That's just to meet the current need and not including the future projection of increased population. In total, Maine needs about 80,000 new homes to meet expected demand by 2030, which is only 5 years away. We could do it. Here's a a little map here that shows where the region breakdown is. This was based on largely economic base and current housing population. So Sanford falls in York County down here in the coastal region, which accounts also for a number of the cities in Maine, as well as the Portland area, which is the highest density of both homes and jobs. But if we're to look at what the numbers of this study put out for us, the coastal region includes 7 counties. 1/7 of the 49,000 homes that are required is 7,000 new homes in York County. That's, of course, a rough number there, but that's about 1,400 new homes per year. York County has 3 cities, Biddeford, Saco, and Sanford. If only 50% of those new homes are located in one of those 3 cities, then Sanford could expect 1,750 new homes by 2030. Which is significantly more than 717. Yes, there are other towns that have an increasing density and are looking to increase their housing production, but 80% of people currently nationwide are living in cities, so a 50% estimate is still somewhat conservative, in my opinion. So if we take that initial calculation that we looked at before from RKG Associates, that's really just looking at business as usual. If Sanford continues to grow in the same rate that it has for the last 20 years, we're looking at 717 homes, or approximately, let's go conservatively in the middle here, about 100 acres of developable land. If we are believing the statewide approach, we could be looking at anywhere close to 1,750 homes, or 250 acres of land used. If everything goes in the rural area, that's 11% of Sanford's total land base that could be eaten up by single-family homes, coming in at 2 acres per lot. Or if we're strategic and we provide the right amount of encouragement and incentives, we could just be looking at 0.3% of homes if everything were to occur in the very generous apartment size of 2,000 square feet. I'm sure you'll agree. Significantly less land area that is then lost to development, and that doesn't even take into account the benefits of having a denser developable land area. And the no parking and the increase in transit, we could go on and on, but I only got 10 minutes, so. We are currently working on the comprehensive plan update. So far, as I've mentioned, we've contracted with the market analysis firm RKG Associates. We formed a very healthy steering committee of approximately 35 people. We're currently reviewing different standards and goals that are in place now in Sanford, as well as looking towards the future. And then the next up, our next phase is to engage the community with a community-wide survey and several pop-ups to kind of talk to people one-on-one and get to hear from them what they'd like to hear, what they'd like to see in the future. Topics that we've covered so far: existing conditions. A lot of RKG is looking at the data so that we can make some decisions that are founded in quantitative analysis. We're looking at zoning 101, which is kind of what the presentation I gave you all last year was about, and trying to look towards the future as we recreate those zones and regulations. We're looking at market opportunities for new jobs and new housing. That's also coming from RKG. And then next up, we'll be looking at different transportation, transit options, multimodal, bike, pedestrian, as well as image and brand, and how we perceive ourselves and market ourselves to the region, as well as zoning changes and opportunities for growth. So I think Jamie's going to talk about where we're at currently with development numbers. I am the hopes and dreams, and Jamie is the building machines. This one?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jamie Cole. I am the Director of Code Enforcement, Planning and Development here for Sanford. I'm going to keep my presentation a little bit shorter, just in the interest of time. What I'm here to talk about tonight is more what have we done in the last year, year and a half as far as housing starts, both single family and multifamily, as well as types of units. So in unit We have single families, multifamilies, accessory dwelling units, mobile homes, so multiple categories. So this first slide is basically talking about number of dwelling units issued, permits issued, and number of occupancy permits issued. So with development, it's hard because you issue a permit and then sometimes it takes 6 months to a year, or in some cases 2 years to get those units actually online. So I broke it up into 2 different categories, both permits issued and then occupancy permits issued. So in 2023, so that would be January through December, we issued a total of 147 building permits to construct 147 units. In that same time frame, we issued 122 occupancy permits. So that was calendar year 2023. In calendar year 2024, which again stopped in August was our last number, so it doesn't include September. We had issued 70 new dwelling unit permits, and we had issued 127 occupancy permits. So again, those numbers don't match because it takes time to evolve. For instance, a future speaker coming up after me, they pulled permits in 2023 for multifamily units. So far this year, they've gotten 14, 20 units online, but they got 60-ish more to come. So those units are a year and a half behind because the length it takes to construct, or in their case, renovate and construct new buildings. So the numbers look kind of skewed because they don't match, but that's why they don't match. Next slide is basically permits by type. Again, calendar year 23, 24. 24 is blue, 20 up till where we are today, 24 is orange. So on the left-hand side of the screen, the top line is multi-family permits issued. Second line is duplex 2-family permits issued, and then single-family attached. So single-family attached is if it's a townhouse-style structure. So it's really a 2-family, but they're side-by-side. The way they're constructed, they're still considered single families, even though they're attached. So the third column is single-family attached, basically condo units. And then the last column is single-family detached. That would typically be your standalone single-family structures. On the right-hand side is occupancy permits issued by type. And you're going to notice we have a few more categories in here. So towards the end of 23, beginning of 24, we got new software that allows us to break down the categories more specifically. So you're going to see more columns over here. So we're now tracking accessory dwelling units separately. As part of LD 2003, the state came in and said every municipality has to allow accessory dwelling units. We already did. We called them accessory apartments, but we already had that provision in place. We did modify it slightly. So I will say indirectly, we've issued more accessory dwelling units permits since LD 2003, but I don't want to say it's a direct cause of 2003 because we already allowed them. I think what happened was the news talking about accessory dwelling units made people realize, oh, wait a second, this is an option. We can do this. So we are seeing more building permits issued for it. We're not really seeing a lot of the occupancy permits yet because, again, it takes a while to build them. But we are issuing a lot more accessory dwelling unit permits today than we did a year ago today. Second column on the right is mobile homes. So you'll also notice that this year we've issued, well, it's like 5, but we only issued 1 the year before. So we're seeing an uptick in basically every type of construction this year. Mobile homes went up, accessory dwelling units are gonna go up. Multifamily units, they're staying about the same, but on that token, I have about 50 units worth of permits approved, waiting for pickup by the developers. So if those would have been included, you'd see this year's numbers almost doubling because we've issued 66 so far this year, and I have 50, again, already approved, just waiting for them to come in and pick it up. So multifamilies are rapidly expanding as well. 2 families have stayed the same. On that column, both of those 2 families, both in the years 23 and 24, those are a result of LD 2003. So LD 2003 basically said you're not allowed to say you can only build one unit on any piece of property in town. You have to allow two, as long as they meet the density. Both of those two families are a result of LD 2003. That is really the only changeable results from all those changes we did to date. Second to the bottom, single-family attached. Again, those are the condo units. About the same. You can see a slight uptick this year compared to last. But you got to remember, last year was the full year. This year, we're only talking 9 of the months. And typically, our building permit issuance is busy right now, right before that first snowfall, and then after the last snowfall in spring. So these numbers, if this conference was in a month, I think you would see a pretty drastic uptick in these numbers as well. But you're already seeing, in most cases, we're doing more than last year. And then the bottom column, single-family detached. Those are your standard single families. In Sanford, those have stayed pretty stable over the course of time. Those haven't increased or decreased a lot with the housing demand, mostly because we don't have a lot of vacant single-family lots available. We had quite a few. We had probably 30 lots in subdivisions that were approved that weren't built during the last boom. All those are now built out. And the planning side of the world, we're seeing a lot of subdivisions coming through. Pretty much all the planning board is reviewing now are subdivisions, either for apartment subdivisions or land subdivisions. So again, these numbers are going to continue to rise because we are starting to get additional lots back on the market. And then this last slide looks kind of busy, but really this is just month by month, all 4 of those data points put together, just so you can kind of see when things typically happen. And you'll notice early spring, late summer is when you see the uptick of units being permitted and occupancy permits issued. And that slide is hard to read. I apologize. It's just, there's no good way to put that information, but it's there for those that want to see it. And I think that's all I had. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. My name is Keith McBride. I'm the Executive Director of the Sanford Regional Economic Growth Council. I'm here to address the role of economic development in housing and what we've done and what we're currently doing, both of which are significant. 10 to 15 years ago, it was very rare that economic development would get involved at all in housing. Those calls when they come in from developers talking about interested in doing subdivisions or building housing would typically be referred over to planning and codes. Today, it is an absolutely critical part of any community's economic development strategy, and it's a critical component of the 8 goals and overall topic areas that the Growth Council is called to focus on by the community as part of our mission. So we take that very seriously and talk constantly about how we can help bring housing. We know this is critical because the question that always gets asked, even in industrial and commercial development, when there's a business that's considering location decisions in a community, the question they've always asked has been about the quality of life in the community. Where are my residents going to live? What's it going to be like for them to be there? That's the number one thing. The difference is that now that question usually starts with, are they going to be able to find a place to live? This question comes up constantly, and we've had to address a lot of these issues that we're going to be talking about here tonight directly with a lot of these developers as they're thinking about their location decision, and we're trying to tell them the opportunities that exist here in Sanford. So Sanford, over time, and Steve touched on this just a bit, has been very proactive and has been a trailblazer in utilizing economic development for housing. And he mentioned specifically the use of tax increment financing for housing. The Growth Council has also played a role in that. I'm going to go over some of the projects from the past very quickly, and Steve touched on a bunch of them in his anyway, but we helped promote handicapped accessible housing at the Mouse and River Apartments, assisted living and memory care at Summer Commons, which provided some beds for those uses here in town, and the project at the roundabout Austin Corner and Austin Place, which is market rate housing, And Steve also touched on Marlin Hall, the senior housing project in Springvale. And all of those utilized the use of tax increment financing to help create a public-private partnership with those developers to make those projects happen. Aside from the city and private developers, the Growth Council is also participating with a lot of our valuable community partners. For example, the Sanford Housing Authority, Diane is here. Diane sits as a member of the Growth Council's Board of Directors, and Mary Hastings, who's our small business advocate, is also here tonight, sits as a member of the Sanford Housing Authority's Development Committee. So we have a lot of partnership and input into that organization. This table that I have here, this is my one slide that I have for you. I didn't want to overdo it with the slides. This is our most recent efforts. These are some things that are ongoing right now. It shows some of the projects that we're currently working on, but it also shows that we're diversifying and changing the ways in which we're trying to increase the role in housing. And we're still utilizing a lot of tax increment financing to partner with developers, but it's worth noting that our use of TIF now, the state law has been changed to allow us to kind of multiple ways utilize TIF to impact housing. The change in the law allows tax increment financing funds, when the city captures them, to be used for homelessness remediation, for affordable housing projects, and even for childcare, which is another one of the major questions that people ask when they're thinking about housing decisions and where they're going to live. Are they going to be able to find childcare? So we're going to utilize TIF to partner with developers to help them create the housing that we need here, and we're encouraging the city, by putting that in our TIF programs, to look towards using some of those funds that we capture from tax increment financing towards providing homelessness remediation, affordable housing, and childcare. That has become a component of every one of our TIFs that we've worked on over the past 3 to 4 years, including those that we've, with the approval of the City Council, been able to amend. And I thank the council for being proactive and looking forward and seeing the future in making those decisions. So Central Park Apartments, this is affordable. It's another thing too, there's a great blend of affordable, market rate, and other projects here that we're working on. The Main and Roberts apartments that are being constructed by TPD Construction here, they've gotten their site plan approval. We're currently in the process of finalizing a tax increment financing district for that project. Stenton Mill redevelopment, Steve mentioned that there is an RFP that's been issued. Our role in that has been marketing, and we launched into a major effort to get the RFP in the hands of the best, the most capable, and the developers who we trust with taking this critical piece of architecture in our city. That's actually a part of our logo there, if you look closely enough down at the bottom, and it's a part of a lot of the city's logos. Take that and make it back into something that is worthy of being a centerpiece of our community logo. So we're making sure we get the right people on board and interested, and so far the response has been outstanding. The development community is very interested, and we think we're going to have some great people working on that project soon, but I can't give any spoilers. And lastly, in the Housing First model, the Housing Authority is working on that in partnership with the city. They're utilizing the Brownfields grant that the city currently has open to complete, just as of yesterday, I think, a phase 1 on those properties to identify environmental conditions. The Growth Council is managing the Brownfields program now, so it's handled out of our office, and we're glad to play a role in that. I did not add to this list the work ongoing at the Nassau dorms for 2 reasons. Number one, following me in just a moment will be Nate from Green Mars, who I think is probably more qualified to speak to it than I am. But it is worth noting this is a really interesting project that's gone on, because it's not just one building, one unit, one group of buildings or one renovation. This is a significant site in Springvale that these developers have taken a very interesting approach of allowing the city, the Growth Council, planning, codes to come in and talk about how are we going to master plan this whole area to get the right type of housing that we want out of this site. The counselors and some of us just took a really interesting tour of the site and talked a little bit more about that. It's fascinating, and they're doing a fantastic job there. So with that in mind, I'll welcome Nate to come up and talk a little bit about housing development in Sanford from the developer's perspective.
Thanks, Keith. Good evening, everyone. Nate Green, Green Mars Real Estate. I'm one of the owners of the Nassau campus. For those of you who aren't familiar with what exactly we're talking about, this is the 3 former dormitories that are secluded up in the woods that were basically blocked off to the public for the last 30 years. In 1983, Nassau College went out of business, and with that, these 3 dormitories have basically sat vacant for the last, 40 years. One of the things that we look at as a developer when we're trying to come up with a project and figure out what we're going to do is that there's just so many unknowns when it comes to developing and specifically residential developments. In order to pull off one of these projects, you have to convince a lot of people to give you a lot of money. That includes banks, investors, equity partners. And in order to do that, you have to figure out how you can mitigate as much risk as you can. So one of the things that my business partner, Chris Marshall, and I look at is what's the town like to deal with? What's the experience we're going to have? What kind of support are we going to have? We've been working on this project now, I think, since probably sometime at the end of 2021 is probably when we first stepped foot on the campus. And, you know, we've had support from the town right from the start. Basically, in order to pull this off, we had to get a TIF, we had to get a contract zone. The site is 27 acres, and it was previously zoned for single family only. So we work with the city council, we work with the planning department, we work with the city manager to get a TIF, credit enhancement TIF, and to get a contract zone to actually make the zoning possible for what we have today, which phase 1, 84 residential apartments, and then multiple phases beyond that of home ownership units and other rentals. And I wanted to take my time up here tonight to talk about some specific instances that we've experienced in this process and why we want to continue to do business with Sanford Springvale in the future because of it. In any development, you have to do what's called a community meeting, whereas basically prefacing any public meetings, you basically bring in the neighbors, bring in the community, people, abutters, in to show them your plans and basically give them insight on what you're doing and familiarize them with the project. We had a community meeting, it was on a Sunday night, and Jamie Cole and Alex both showed up to the meeting and took the time to actually talk with us, talk with the community, and provide the city's perspective. Now, I've been doing real estate now, believe it or not, for about 15 years and done projects in several towns, and that's the only time I've experienced that kind of support. Looking back, when Chris and I were actually trying to get this project off the ground and make the numbers work, there were some significant budget gaps. The support that we got from the Growth Council, from the city manager, and from the city council, and actually pulling off the credit enhancement TIF agreement and the contract zone were imperative in actually being able to pull this project off. If we hadn't been able to get either one of those things, this project would have never happened. And as we stand today, there are 28 units that we've gotten occupancy permits, 26 of them are rented, and we expect to have the other 2 buildings online by the end of the year, early 25. There's one more story I'd like to share too, and as we talk about these development timelines, every day is massively critical. What they say is time kills all deals. Every day that a deal goes on, whether it's from pre-development, construction, post, it just makes it that much harder to pull things off. Not to spotlight Jamie anymore, but he actually showed up on his day off to do an inspection so we get occupancy. Which, once again, I've dealt with a lot of code officers, and it's just spectacular, the kind of support. And Chris and I feel it from the whole city. So we're super excited for the future of the project. We've done a master plan with the planning board. We have a grant from Maine Housing to do home ownership units. We have another application in for another 18 units on the property. The future is looking bright on Nassau. And just one more story I'd like to share while I'm here, just to kind of wrap this whole thing up. This afternoon, we had the Growth Council, the town manager, the mayor, all come to the site and take a tour of the project and ask questions and take a look around and see the progress. And that's just super exciting, and we really appreciate it. It means a lot to us. So thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Becky Brink. I'm the mayor of Sanford. And I want to say, have you been overwhelmed yet with all of the information? If not, I'm going to try to blow your socks off even more. You kind of wonder what the city council does. Well, every year we set goals. And sometimes those goals are overwhelming. They usually are overwhelming. After we set them, we go, can we really achieve these? So I'm going to talk about 3 areas. And I'm going to quickly talk about them because we want to get to your questions. The first area I'm going to talk about is under community development. We always set goals under here. And a big part of that was revitalization of downtown. Well, for those of you who are looking at our walls, this is the RAISE grant. Multiple streets will be redone starting in 2025. You might have already noticed on the back side of Number 1 Pond, that's already been redone, and we're now coming on the front side. So it'll just keep going, and that'll also attract more businesses to downtown. I'd also like to point out that we now have 5 new restaurants and 1 brewery, my favorite. Also, the improving housing. We now have, which some people have already spoken about, we have new family homes. We have the Nassau dorm, now apartments. And by the way, I knew him when he was just little. So it is so nice to have you back in our community. It's a pleasure to have you here. Some of the other apartments are on Country Club Road, on Washington Street apartments, Patriots Lane, Cottage Street apartments, and a new subdivision off Gilmet Extension. Another area I'd like to talk about is under economic development, which you already heard from Keith, who is part of our economic development, and so is Mary, and I really appreciate all they do. We had 50, now this is meeting some of our goals, if you're wondering how that relates. We had 53 new commercial businesses just this year. We have new airport hangars, so if you guys go down by the airport, the latest one that's closest to the road, that's brand new. YCCC has an expansion. In case you're wondering, they got, I believe it was $5 million to expand their program there, and that's going to meet the needs of several of our major businesses that feed into Sanford. If you've been by the old Burger King, there's no more Burger King. It was torn down. You can see the construction right now, and there's going to be a new Chase Bank there. And my all-time favorite is Starbucks is coming, and it looks like their building is almost done, and they're almost ready to open. And to support this development that we have had, we are modernizing our zoning for the future vision. And this started with hiring Aaron Moriarty, thank you, and by expanding. By the way, if you're wondering what they're snickering back and forth about the parking situation, Steve feels we never have enough parking, and Aaron feels you always have too much parking, so we don't need as much. So they are on each other all the time. Aaron's right, though. So we really appreciate that, and I want to also talk about codes. It is increased. Jamie has done a phenomenal job. His program has expanded. We've had to expand it in order to deal with the large number of people who are coming to Sanford. So thank you for all you and your team does. I'd like to go on to capital improvement. Several things under capital improvement obviously are necessary when your community expands. We had to ramp up the pavement conditions because if you get more building going on, you're going to have more cars going over your roads, and we need to make sure these are improved. We also have a master plan for improving our parks, because if you've got more apartments around, you need parks. You need places where the kids can go outside and have fun and interact with one another. So that's another area we're looking at. Also, this November, Sanford citizens get to vote on 2 new fire stations. You can see with all the development that's coming to Sanford, all the new houses, all the new apartment buildings, it is amazing what we are doing as a community. We need to protect our citizens. We need to protect our firefighters. So this is all part of it. The fire departments are changing drastically from what we knew when we were kids. Very little of what they do is fire prevention. A large amount is medical. So just to let you know that part of the new buildings are going to have facilities inside them that will help our citizens. So now that I've kind of given you a little bit of a teaser on what's happening, and hopefully it'll help you develop questions, I want to, at this point, we use the Alice report to develop a lot of our stuff and to think about what we're going to do. So at this point, I'm going to introduce Dan Coyne, who is from the United Way. He's actually going to, which will do a much better job than I could, explain the Alice report. So come on down, Dan. And after Dan's, I'll be getting back up and we'll be doing question and answer. Go ahead.
All right. The mouse. Is this? Trying
They
to
took that one away from us. We have
right
to use
here.
that one now, yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Good. All right. Thank you, Mayor Brink, and members of the City Council, and everyone. City Manager Buck. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about ALICE, which is an acronym. I'm looking at Superintendent Nelson, and ALICE, I know in the school setting means something else, but here we're to talk about a population that I often think about. This is going to date myself, but thinking about Alice from the Brady Bunch. That frontline worker that we didn't think too much about, that falls largely invisible to the system. And so ALICE is an acronym that stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained. The mouse is pausing like I am. Oh, that's right, down here, right? Oh, gosh. You would do a much better job than I would, Mayor Brink, so apologies. Thank you. For asset limited, income constrained, employed, a population that has existed for decades, but that we haven't been able to have a name for or the data to talk about with any meaningful way. And it is really heartening to hear Mayor Brink and Sanford, I know, really look at this population and figure out what can all sectors do to come together to make sure that we're helping everybody experiencing financial hardship. So when I think about the cup of coffee I bought this morning and the bagel that I did, I very likely interacted with someone who's experiencing ALICE. And I think there are folks who are ALICE who we're going to talk about tonight in the room. And it is also a fluid situation. You can be ALICE one day, maybe not the next, and then ALICE again. So let's dig into a little bit about ALICE in York County. So by a traditional measure of financial hardship, we look at the federal poverty level. First introduced in the 1960s, and for a time was a great measure. It really provided us the first opportunity to look at financial hardship nationally and to determine where people are struggling. But it has not kept up with the times. And in fact, the federal poverty level in Sanford is the same as it is in Los Angeles, and the same that it would be in, say, Fort Kent. So while a semi-useful measure, it has, again, not kept up with the times. And so what we have done at United Way is we've joined a growing number of states as part of this ALICE movement to have a more accurate picture of financial hardship. So what does it really mean to be able to get by and to be able to look at that by state and to be able to look at that by county so that you begin to say what it means to experience financial hardship in Sanford or York County has a more accurate picture than would it be if you were living in Los Angeles or Seattle or Fort Kent. So in York County, we can see by the traditional measure of poverty, 9% of households are under the federal poverty level, the distinguisher in many ways for the ability to access government support programs. But what is staggering is another almost 31%, due to rounding errors is why these don't add up, but it's about 31% who make more than that federal poverty level, but not enough to get by with any sense of security or consistency any regularity, any predictability. So about 40% of households in York County, so almost 37,000 are struggling paycheck to paycheck. And we'll talk in a moment about what that budget actually looks like. But Alice is everywhere, and you can see a snapshot here of the York County towns. Sanford is fairly high in terms of the number of households who are struggling with financial hardship. And I'm going to talk for the rest of the presentation. When I say Alice, I'm going to merge Alice and those below the federal poverty level into one, just to talk about the numbers who are experiencing financial hardship. 48% of Sanford households struggle paycheck to paycheck. It's a bit more than 9,000 households. At United Way, we tend to look at disaggregated data to be able to look at where we can tell like there is real need, but Alice is everywhere, it's every population, it's in every town in Maine. But we can see that disproportionately, households with people older than 65 and under 25 are more likely to be Alice. We can look at various household composition sizes, and if you go to AliceInMaine.org, you can, if you really like looking at data, and I know some of you do, you can actually look at a ton of different household sizes. But what we can see is single female headed households, 79% in York County, 79% are Alice. And while the vast number of households who are Alice in Maine are white, we do see a disproportionate impact on those households who are black or two or more races as compared to white households. So I started to talk at the beginning of the presentation about the federal poverty line being misleading. So if we were only looking at that again, it says less than 10% are struggling. But let's talk about this household budget in York County. On the left-hand column, you can see the roughly 9 categories that comprise what the Alice movement says is required to get by. Rent, utilities comprise housing, also child care, food, transportation, health care, technology, a very basic phone plan, a miscellaneous bucket that allows a 10% swing in any one of those categories, and then what a household would pay in state and federal income tax. Sales tax is often included in the other categories baked in. Here are the four of the most common household types in York County. Single adult, one in child care, 2 adults, 2 in child care, and a single older adult. And you can see for that single adult, to be able to get by, and again, this is a conservative budget, it doesn't include saving for retirement. I went to the Sea Dogs 2 weeks ago for that playoff push, didn't include me being able to go to the Sea Dogs. Doesn't include contributing to a retirement plan. It really is only these categories. That single adult would have to make almost $37,000. And the 2 adults, 2 in childcare, more than $97,000. And you can see the hourly wage here on the chart. Well, what is that gap? I could have done a Price is Right rules, and I think we'd see, but at the bottom is the federal poverty level. That single adult, we would say by the Alice threshold, would have to make almost $37,000. That federal poverty level in Sanford, in Portland, and Los Angeles is $13,590, and I should say this is 2022 data. That 2 adults, 2 in child care, needing to make more than $97,000, the federal poverty level is $27,750, and you can see the gap here in the middle. Here are 5 common occupations in the state and in the county and what their median hourly wage is. But to be able to make, based on their household size, what they would have to actually make, you see the shortfall here for an hourly shortfall and then a monthly shortfall for those. I'm trying to go fast to be able to go through in about 10 minutes. And so what we start to see here is, again, some more data. Almost 50% in York County of Alice households are rent burden, paying either more than 30% of their income on housing or more than 50% on rent. Almost 2/3 have a 3 to 4 year old child who's not enrolled in preschool, and more than a quarter don't have access to high-speed internet in their homes, when we think about what it would take for a future economy. And we're here to talk about housing, so what you can see here for between owner cost burden and rent burdened, almost 50% are rent burdened. Burden meaning they spend 30% or more of their income on housing, and severe burden meaning they spend more than 50%. And then you can see what it would be for those who own as well. This is growth rates in York County. I really didn't add county. This is the county, not the town of York. But what we see is while the federal poverty level has declined by 1% in York County, the Alice population has grown by 57% in that same time frame. I keep wanting to grab that other mouse. So United Way in action, this is just something we would normally have. There's some programs. I know a lot of providers here also have programs that help, like York County Community Action running the free tax preparation program and so on for folks who make under $64,000. But there are ways to do it, and I think the point is here it takes all of us. And this is just a slide of, we have a research advisory group that looks at this data. It's all publicly available data to paint that more accurate picture. And this is a group that advises on a yearly basis. I think I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, now comes the fun part. It's your part. So the city council, the municipal staff, and our, as you can see around here, our key partners are going to help answer your questions. So what I'd like to have you do is, we've got 3 places we're getting questions from. One is online. Another is people have written in questions. And are you doing the online ones, or is Jordan? If people are. And Jordan, are you doing the ones that people wrote in? Okay. And then the people who are here, you can. So what I'd like to have you do is, if I'm going to handle the people who are here first that have a question, then we'll kind of move around, and then we'll, if you raise your hand again, it'll be okay, and we'll go back to the live audience. So I'd like you, if you have a question, to come up to the mic, give us your name and where you live, or if you represent an organization of some kind, what that is. And then the people here will introduce themselves, and I'll call them. So if you could let me know who, so not all of you answer at one time. And hopefully this will go smoothly. So do we have anybody in the audience at this point who have a question? Come on down.
Well, thank you for calling me up first. My name is John Flagler. I'm representing the Maine Military and Community Network. And the first thing, I'd like to do a bit of housekeeping and thank Deputy Mayor and our state senator for helping me and my Korean veteran get his sign that will, so that he can use his wheelchair ramp without the nuisance of the neighbor next door. Thank you very much. I represent this group, and what our aegis is to help disabled veterans, and not only disabled veterans, but we're helping veterans who have just redeployed home and are entering the civilian world to transition into that world more smoothly. Question I have is, do you have priority populations that you're wanting to get into housing, such as our families, the first priority, our service, low-wage service workers who are just entering the market? Do we have a provision for them? And, of course, the disabled population.
Diane, can you field that one? This is Diane Small. She's the Executive Director of Sanford Housing Authority.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
Is your mic on, too? Okay.
So for veterans, Section 8, you do have preference points. So when you apply for Section 8, there's a number of different points you can get. You can get 5 points if you're elderly or disabled. You get 10 points if you're a veteran.
Okay.
You get 300 points if you live and/or work in our jurisdiction. And there's one other, but I have to look it up. But I wrote it down because I anticipated somebody might ask. Hang on one second. Oh, and 50 points if you're not already subsidized. So we do. And we do also offer vouchers to an organization called CHOM that has veterans housing in Springvale, and we voucher those as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for
My second and last question is on your homeless. You have a task force.
Yeah, we have an unhoused task force, yes.
Yeah. Who would be the chairperson for that? Steve, right there. Okay. Steve, you're all the way around the table, and I brought some resources from my organization, and I think I'll give them to Eric right now.
How about
because
if
it'd be
you give
more
them to
convenient.
Carter? Because Carter is on our task force.
Oh, okay, very good.
So for those people who
one of
are
the-
on the task force, raise your hand so you'll see how many people we actually have. And
Oh,
you'll see
very
behind
good.
you, there are multiple
Yeah.
people on that task force. And we've been
Why
meeting
didn't
for
my
almost 2
colleagues?
years.
Bob and I have known each other for a long time. We used to work at the same school system. What I've just handed is a packet of our resources. This is not only resources for housing, but I have resources, and I was kind of reticent to come tonight because the resources we have for homeless and housing is kind of limited. It's temporary housing is basically what you have with York County Shelter. We also have a program in Biddeford for homeless veterans through the Maine Volunteers of America. We have 2 houses there. And when I say a house, we have Career House, which is kind of like a dormitory. And we have programs for employment. We have employment for programs for mental health, for substance abuse. We're treating that as with the clients there. We also have Hewitt House is actually a group of condominiums, and they can remain there for 6 months to a year. It's all dependent on how quickly we can integrate them back into the into society with a job, training, a program if they have substance abuse or something like that. I am going to revisit you because I would like to join your task force and bring with me our resources. Most of our resources are aimed at the mental health and the substance abuse issues and some of those issues that our veterans have. But I think you'll find these resources handy, and appreciate your time. Thank you.
And let me introduce you to the person right in front of you. This is Megan Jean Gendron, and she's the
I
Executive
know.
Director of York County Shelter Program.
We've
So-
been friends for many years.
Good.
Thank you for your time.
Fantastic. Do we have anybody else from the audience who has a question? Come on down.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew Dupree. I was born in Sanford graduate, veteran. When's the city going to come with a situation where we don't have to go to Biddeford, Newington, Portland to get sporting equipment for our kids? When are we going to focus on a Target, big stores, instead of just a Walmart and a Lowe's?
Does anyone have? Keith?
Hi, Keith McBride, Executive Director of the Growth Council. So funny you should say that. Aaron had mentioned we are currently working with a group, RKG Associates, who's doing a market study. And one of the focus of their market study is to take a look at opportunities for retail growth in the community. We have retail vacancy. We have storefront space available. And we also have, as their study has pointed out, a lot of retail money leaving Sanford. People live here, they have to go to Biddeford to shop, they have to go to some of the other communities you mentioned. and for what? And that is one of the highest things that they've pointed out in this study, that there is an opportunity here for sporting goods, clothing, books and hobby, I think was another one of the big categories that they've pointed out. So literally, this is information we're just getting as of the last month or so. What we're hoping to do with that information in the last piece of the market study process is going to be for them to produce an action plan, which we think is probably going to involve some action items to go out and try to find some of those businesses that are currently out there in the United States that are expanding, that are looking for new retail locations, and tell them about the opportunity that exists here, which is exactly what my office kind of specializes in. So I think you've hit on a point that's definitely been brought to our attention, and we have numbers to back up just what an opportunity there is here for something like that, and we'll be taking a lot of action on it fairly soon, because my belief is where the opportunity meets, profit for the private sector, chances are that's when you can make something happen. And I think we have the numbers to show that that's exactly the condition we have here, specifically as it relates to sporting goods. So I'm on board with everything that you said. I see exactly that, and I think we're gonna take some action on it.
Well, let's see some action.
Yeah.
Thank you.
35, and I haven't seen it yet. So,
All right, thank you.
have a good night.
Anyone else with a question in the audience?
Hello, everybody. I'm Walter. I'm a Sanford resident. Kind of back.
And Walter, we need your name and number, because I know you want to be on some of our committees.
Well, I work with the community a lot, and kind of to piggyback off the prior question, we do not really have much commercial development going on, which commercial development leads to more populace. Obviously, you have quite a big burden with a lot of the applications for occupancy along with building. Seems like your personnel are a little overwhelmed with getting those through. Obviously, it's a lengthy process as well for actually constructing. How are we as a community in town going to be able to not really speed up the process, but help that process? More people means more business, which means more business come to the bigger populace.
And I'm going to tackle some of that because of some of the ordinances that were present before. The council has addressed multiple ordinances opening the door to allow businesses to come in a little easier. The other thing is, with all the apartments and everything we now have coming in, the more population you have, the more you will attract different businesses. We've already attracted 53 new businesses this year alone. So we're getting there. And the more that happens, the more people are going to, Sanford's the place to be. So the more we can get our citizens to talk positive about Sanford, to point out the good things that are happening here, the more businesses will want to come because they'll want to know what's going on. Jamie, did you have any comments you would like to make about that?
I will add to that. We are forever evolving our processes on how businesses get approved for opening, all the way from brick and mortar new construction to remodel. We have been evolving our processes for the last 5 years, and probably will take another 2 or 3 before we get them all to exactly where we need to be. We have streamlined the process for new business. We have had multiple small businesses start this year. We have a few bigger businesses with permits issued right now down at the Center for Shopping. So while we are doing a lot of occupancy permits for residential, we are also seeing an uptick in commercial growth as well. The Midtown Marketplace, I believe we call it now. Main Street Marketplace, sorry.
Which used to be the Midtown Mall, if people are wondering what you're talking about.
That property is actually now almost full. There's only one vacant unit in it. The owner of that property bought it about 5 years ago. He has rapidly been trying to beautify it. They went before design review a week ago for facade improvements, partially funded through a program through economic development. So I think both the developer side are improving some of the available stock. The city side is improving our ordinances, trying to streamline and make it easier. I fully recognize we still have a little bit to go, but I'm proud of how far we've come thus far. And in the future, near future, you're going to see some larger businesses opening up down at the Center for Shopping.
Can I make one comment? So, long time ago, very beginning of my time on the city council, I repeat this story quite a bit, but Charlie Colgan was here, was a famous state economist, and he did make a very strong point about housing comes first, and that's one of the things we've been working on really hard. So the housing brings the businesses to serve the people in the housing, which is why you're seeing an uptick in retail businesses to serve the people who are moving here. If you look at all the housing that's going in, I mean, the mill in Springvale is going to be redeveloped into housing. I think we're going to see a huge uptick in small business there. The larger stuff comes after that. So if you know, and I don't see big box stores in the near future because there isn't a large enough population base for their presence. Walmart it's kind of like a McDonald's. It's going to go in a lot of places. A Target is further spread out. Think in your head of where these businesses are, and it helps. But it is housing, small businesses, large businesses, and businesses that want that population to actually work within their industrial type of business. So there you go. That's what Charlie Colgan taught me a long time ago.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Come on down.
Yeah, I apologize for my appearance. I was out walking. I forgot about this meeting today, but I'd like to thank you. I'd like to give you a little foundation of my background to kind of lead into the question that you had just mentioned, Becky. So I was the director of nursing of the largest municipality in the state of Maine through COVID-19 as the director of nursing of the Barron Center. So that was a pretty interesting time working closely with Kristen Dow, the Director of Department of Health and Human Services for the City of Portland. So we came across multiple challenges at the same time, and I think that those are still cascading now, and that is the refugee relocation that are occurring, the homeless crisis that is occurring, substance abuse crisis that's occurring. It's a multi-tiered system that I think we're approaching on, and what we did find is when you look at your annual budget, there are a lot of things that we were not able to calculate in. So we were really running a budget of about $20 million in a deficit because we weren't able to calculate the housing needs that was $3 million a month. But kind of piggyback on Becky's point right now. So if we're focusing on housing first for the homeless and, you know, people that are challenged, traditionally, the unhoused population are suffering usually with some form of behavioral health issues, psychiatric issues, and they're needed additional services. Have the City of Sanford partnered with the state of Maine to increase those services in anticipation of the increased needs for overdoses for the fire department, the costs associated with that, as well as the additional behavioral health services that will be needed for those communities? And I have more, but I'll stop there.
All right, I'm going to call on Steve Buck, our city manager.
Yes, yes, as far as partnering with the state of Maine, or at least the advocacy portion of that. So last year, we had our first, what do we call it, the homeless forum. It was done in December of last year, a little bit too late in the legislative cycle, but it was our first time in doing that. All of the partners that you see sitting here tonight were a part of that forum. And the forum was at a performing arts center, and it was focused specifically on identifying the needs. We brought statistics from, you know, Sanford, Biddeford, Saco, all of the cities and other towns within the region of our number of unhoused people and where they came from, the whys and such under that. And we put forward requests and focused areas as far as future need for funding. So definitely around substance use disorder beds, mental health beds, the lack of capacities, specifically funding for our shelter programs. The pre-existing shelter programs are grotesquely underfunded and need to be funded fully. So that's the pre-existing beds. And then we're seeking to expand bed services beyond that and shelter services. So we communicated that with our legislators. Bear in mind it was in the short session, emergency bills only, but there was a significant amount of unanticipated revenue that the state was working on dispensing. From that, I believe we had a good attendance. About 60% of the state legislators were there at a relatively short call. Communicated well with them. They went back and advocated. Some of that got lost in stronger advocacy, throughout the session, but a significant amount of funds were put through what we see mostly through Main State Housing. And there was programming in there that we're just now being able to start to take advantage of because of the amount of time for the legislation to pass, become active, and then figuring out the mechanism for the state to dispense of the funds and such under that. We're planning our second forum. It's November 13th or 14th. We're still battling that out. Reminder, Matt Nelson, we're still battling that out as to which of those 2 days that will be. To talk with our legislators again, both those that are returning as well as those that might be newly elected. So the earlier timing this year is specific to November 5th will be the election. We'll know who our state representatives are at that point in time. They'll be invited to this forum where we'll talk to them again about what happened last year, positive, the pros and cons of what happened, and do the asks for this year as they go back to the long session of the legislature to work on that. So our hopes are by having that early enough in November that we can affect legislation before the cloture date. So long answer, yes, and we will continue to do that. We have a state representative here tonight. They've been very proactive in responding to our needs. But one last point. I have found over the last number of years, especially through COVID, that we as York County need to do a better job of advocating for ourselves. I see a lot of the assistance going to certain targeted areas in the state of Maine, not York County. You can sort of know where those major spots are, but not into York County. We need to do a better job of advocating for ourselves. So that's our most recent efforts in that regard.
Come on right to the mic. And the reason we're going to the mic is because there are people in TV land that need to hear us.
Yes, of course. My name is David Langstaff. I live in Springvale, Maine. I'm actually a military brat from a Coast Guard captain that brought us up here to be an icebreaker of South Portland. I spent my youth in Portland, Oregon, working in property management, Mr. Green, so I'm pretty familiar with your real estate world. But I would like to, when I look at these issues that we're having today, is one issue that I find that we're not proactively thinking about the residents in the community for the long term. So we're going to be expanding a population of residents who are going to have behavioral health needs, but they're going to grow older. So how are we going to house them when they get older? Because they start to create a financial burden on the communities. So I left the Barron Center and I actually managed one of 3 geropsych state-funded organizations or facilities in the state called the Gorham House and rebuilt that program, which is a cost-reimbursed program. I would advocate for the city of Sanford for growing that population to build that elder care community and partner with the state of Maine so we can actually build a place for them to grow throughout their lifespan in the community.
Thank you very much. Anyone else with a question?
I don't have a question, but I'd like to make a comment.
Sure, come on down. Just name and what you represent, please, or where you live.
My name is Colby Vizina. Grew up in Sanford. 25 now. 25. I'm a philosopher. I run a nonprofit that teaches philosophy in Maine. And I just wanted to make a statement. It's not a question. But what do you think the source of the housing crisis is? Where does the problem come from? Right? Undersupply. People can't afford them. Why is that? Why are we not building enough houses? Well, I'd like to offer a new idea, a new ideal, that if you want to build more, you got to stop punishing development. You got to lower taxes, you got to get rid of permits, you got to get rid of zoning, and let people build. Let Nate do his job. Come in and buy land and build things for people that want to buy, right? And not punish them for that. So just dream with me for a second here, right? So let's say we got rid of property taxes entirely. 0. None of them. Who would be interested in that, right? Just like people nearby, they hear about that and they're like, man, if I buy a house here, I don't ever have to pay taxes on it. I can build as much as I want. I can own as much as I want. I don't have to be punished for it. That's amazing. So instantly, buyers from everywhere are already wanting to get in here. And then Nate sees that people want to buy here, and now he wants to build, right? That's just one idea. But maybe the question needs to be asked is, should we be sitting around here like communist commissars and thinking about how to adjust zoning a little bit, or how we need to spend a little money here or there? Or should we maybe think government is the problem and not the solution here? Yeah.
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. Anyone else? Jordan, do we have some, you could share the ones people wrote in? By the way, I got your name correct this time.
Good job.
I call her by her mother's name all the time. Go figure.
I'm a little too short for where it was. Okay, so these comments were pulled from the city's Facebook as well as community pages, and I kind of combined them all to make a long list of questions. So just stop me because I have about 17. And I don't think we have time for all of those. Some of them are multi-part. So to start, how does the city define affordable housing, and what are the city's goals or benchmarks for expanding affordable housing options?
Keith, is that a you or is that a Steve?
Hey, nobody wants it. How about Mikey? There we go. He'll try anything. So affordability, we typically look at the categories by the area median income. So we have workforce. Let me start at the top, right? We have market rate. So there's no cap on that. There's no restriction on that. We look at workforce housing that might be up to 120% of the area median income, AMI. We look at the next step below that. There are some categories that are subsidized through Main State Housing that get you to 80% AMI. Some get down to the affordability into the 40% and or lower. Some are as low as 30%. So typically that's how we view the normally accepted definition of the various housing categories. I do have a slide here. It's not open right now, but it looked at the examination of the city's use of tax increment financing across a broad spectrum of everything from congregate care, housing, to market rate, to workforce housing, ADA specific, age specific, because we see quite a transition here in the community. As people retire on a fixed income, they might let go of their house, which is wonderful because a family typically buys that, keeps students in our schools, people in the workforce, and then they go into a more affordable apartment living situation for them. So, yeah, so you can see in this slide, we have the senior affordable housing, senior housing at market rate, ADA accessible specific units, skilled care, market rate, affordable workforce pending, there's 90 units of those, market rate pending, 120 units of those. So you can see we have approved using tax increment financing 359 units, 211 known pending for us as of today. That would get us to 570 new units in the short period of time that the city's been partnering with the private sector towards incentivizing this commercial development. So how we go about setting those, really we're responding to the market as to what the market will bear to build. Because when you look at, if you're building, someone like Nate could tell us far better than I, but if you're going to build for a market, let's say that's going to be at 60% AMI, you can't afford to build that without some level of other support, be it through Main State Housing or other mechanisms, because the cost of doing that, labor and materials, is just too high to build to that level. So the city seeks to find those opportunities, work with the private sector who does the development, and we can incentivize through tax and increment financing or other mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you have anything you wanted to add to his brilliant? Okay, we're all set. All right, Jordan, could you look at, we've been now here an hour and a half, so if you could have 3 questions, so ask one now and then combine for another 2.
Okay. Can you discuss the changes in the housing market since COVID and what the current availability looks like?
Jamie, I think that's you. And Rebecca might have some stuff to add too. We've got the 3 perfect people sitting there.
So Becca has detailed numbers. I'm going to summarize it. When COVID hit, everybody thought the world was going to stop, and it temporarily did for a week or 2. And then all of a sudden, people realized what a beautiful state we live in, and we have a little bit of room to stretch out, and then all of a sudden, everybody from everywhere out started to move here. So since COVID, our housing market has, I'm going to say, rapidly increased. Availability has rapidly decreased. Cost of those dwelling units have rapidly increased. I personally am seeing a slight decrease as of very recently. I don't know if Becca would agree with me. She knows more about that than I. But overall, I would say COVID caused the Maine market in general to double literally almost overnight. And it has recovered a little bit. It has decreased a little bit. But I'd guess it jumped 100%, it's decreased 10%. I don't know if that's fairly accurate, Becca?
So I pulled stats from Maine listings, and basically I looked a year over year. So I did, August of 23 and August of 24, and I looked at the median sales price in Sanford specifically. And last year, the median sales price was at $371, and this year we're at $394.9. So, prices are still increasing, and a lot of that is due to the fact that there is no inventory. And as we have all been saying, the demand is still there. Aaron pointed out the lack of housing units that we have in the entire state, and it is statewide. It is not just specifically to Sanford. The good news is, though, we are starting to see a little bit of increase in inventory a little bit. So from in August of 23, you were looking at 23 single-family homes listed at the end of the month, and then this past August, we're looking at 42 single-family homes listed. So that those listings are starting to come back up. The high interest rates over the past couple of years doesn't help with your inventory levels. If you refinanced your home and you had that nice, 3% or less interest rate, you're not going to want to put your house on the market and go and buy a house with a 7% interest rate. So hopefully with interest rates starting to come down a little bit, that might help with the inventory levels as well.
And Steve, am I correct that the average income in Sanford has increased?
Yeah, so I may defer over to Aaron on this. I was fascinated by RKG, the original information that they... Yeah. I was fascinated by their, some of the starting impacts. Basically, COVID was good to us. I don't think so, but because I know what it did to valuation and everything and whatnot. But that when you look at the impact, who moved here and the whys and such into that, they are coming from elsewhere, right? They drove the cost of the housing market up such that, you can't, if you lived here, you can't afford to buy it, but they brought their income with us. So when you look at our statistics, we have risen more rapidly here in York County than all of our surrounding neighbors. So that was that positive, if there is such a thing as a positive from COVID. They brought their income with them. A lot of them still working remotely. So if we had done our Sanford Net Fiber study that we did pre-COVID and such like that, I was amazed at how many remote workers we had then. I'd like to redo that survey work because I bet our remote workers now have gone up dramatically because we're seeing it in the income levels. So, Aaron?
Well, I wish I could share this bar graph on the screen for you as well, but from 2017 to 2022, we have had a significant increase in both the household incomes as well as educational attainment in Sanford. I can give numbers if you'd like, but for instance, in the category of 100,000 to 150,000 household income, in 2017 was about 1,000 households. Today, it's about 1,800, so.
Oh, almost
800,
double.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, even more so, $150,000 to $200,000 for household income has gone from 217 in 2017 to 740.
Wow. Thank you. We are improving. All right. Jordan?
How does the city and their community partners ensure that veterans, seniors, asylum seekers, and other vulnerable populations are fairly supported in the housing process?
Thank you. Diane, would that be a question for you?
So again, with the Section 8 program, we have a centralized wait list that takes into consideration those points that I described earlier. So you get those preference points, and that's how you're placed onto the wait list. So it's equitable for everyone. As far as veterans, they get the most points with 10. Seniors and people with disabilities get 5 points. If you're unsubsidized, you get 50 points, and if you, just the baseline is 300 if you live or work in our community. So that's how you get put on the wait list, and it's date stamped. So that's kind of the equity part. So if you're a veteran who lives in Sanford, you're going to get the maximum points of 365, which raises you to the top of the list. So that's kind of how that works for housing. We also have senior housing that's available for people. We have project-based vouchers with area communities that help place people. We have homeless vouchers in our community as well. So we're not able to help asylum seekers. So I just want to clarify for people that when our new Mainers come in, they're not automatically eligible to go onto the Section 8 wait list. They have to go to a different status before that. So they're not taking vouchers away. And if they were to apply, they would get we'd go through the preference points. They would get those and then be put on the wait list, just like everyone else.
Thank you. Carter?
So we also, when we think about housing, we think about access to housing for folks who are homeless. And how we work with folks to prioritize those needs. And so we think really folks are unhoused for a range of different reasons that tend to be unique to the individual. And so we use a process called coordinated entry, which is a centralized process for prioritizing and housing individuals. And there are 4 elements to that. The first is access. And so that's about engaging individuals who are homeless through street outreach. As Steve mentioned, the mental health unit was doing a lot of that work early on. And collectively now a lot of the organizations in the community are doing that work now, although there's a gap in that particular service. And so that kind of engagement is to help understand who's homeless and who needs support. And then there's an assessment, which is a uniform assessment to really gauge the needs of the individual, because as I say, individuals are homeless for different reasons. And then a prioritization, which is determining based on that individual assessment what the needs of that individual are, and then connecting that individual to housing based on that individual's needs. So that's done equitably across all populations in the community.
Thank you very much. Jordan, one more question.
What resources are available to help keep people in their homes? I'm hoping you can touch on seniors as well as residents facing food insecurity.
Who would like to challenge? Carter? And just to introduce you, it's Carter Friend. He's the Executive Director of YCAC.
Thank you very much. I'll talk generally about resources to help people who are people remain in their homes. And so I think this really touches on the data that Dan presented from United Way, and I think that ALICE data is so important, and I want to thank United Way for putting that data together and for Dan for bringing that tonight. So there are a wide range of resources that we provide, and there are others in the community that provide resources as well to help people remain in their homes. So for example, we help provide financial help so that people can stretch their dollars as far as possible. Thinking about the ALICE folks who are struggling to make ends meet, and we do that through helping through programs such as the HEAP or Energy Assistance Program, or the Low Income Assistance Program, which is a electricity program. We also help folks. Maine has a very old, and Sanford has a very old housing stock. And so we address bricks and mortar issues so that those homes can remain in good condition so folks can stay in those homes. And we do that through things like heating system replacement, weatherization, and home repair. We provide education for folks who are interested in purchasing a home. So we have a home ownership class program where folks can come learn from us about purchasing a home, first-time home buyers, and then also we support them with post-purchasing counseling. Transportation is a critical service for making sure people are able to remain in their homes. We provide the service here in Sanford with Sanford Transit, which we partner with the city on, and a range of other services to help people get to work and school and other basic needs. We provide access to childcare so that parents can remain employed and afford housing. And then we provide access to health care for folks who cannot afford it, which keeps people healthy, employed, and in their homes. So a broad range of things that touch on a wide variety of aspects and barriers to people remaining in their homes.
Thank you very much.
And I have, in terms of seniors, the Southern Maine Agency, Megan Walton from the Southern Maine Agency on Aging was not able to make it tonight, but I have a handout that I'll pass around with resources from the Southern Maine Agency.
And let me ask, Larissa, is all this information going into a packet that the public would have access to?
So all of the stuff that's been shared up on screen and all of the handouts that are available at the back of the room printed out are also available on the city's website in the packet for this meeting.
Okay.
It's been shared with all of the councilors via iLegislate as well.
Thank you. Does the audience have, I can take one more question. Okay. Steve Buck, who is our city manager, is going to wrap up with a great statement at the end to encourage us to move forward.
I will now apologize for not introducing myself at the start of the meeting. I had too many things going on upstairs. It's been a busy day, so I apologize. So Stephen Buck, City Manager here in Sanford. So I did not pre-write any conclusions. I've been jotting down bullet points as we went through this evening. And there's several resounding themes. When it comes to housing and housing of people, it takes a multitude of actions and partners to allow to address our combined housing needs. So as people have brought a diverse set of questions here this evening, there's an equally diverse group of people sitting around here to address housing and housing of people in our city. Cities work diligently to maximize the quality of development through planning and incentives, partnerships such as the public-private partnerships of tax income financing. We do that extensively with state agencies as well, such as the RAISE grant is a federal, state, and local project in order to leverage our valuable resources and get the greatest impact as possible. We continue to monitor the consumption of resources. So you can't just build housing at no end. The schools have limited resources, our water, our sewer, our streets, all of that infrastructure has a limited capacity. We still have good capacities in almost all of those areas. So we're not yet in any crisis mode. We're not in the business of NIMBYism or shutting down and having moratoriums and limitations as far as housing, because we've invested in good infrastructure here, the water, sewer, transportation aspects that allow us to continue to build to address our housing needs. We continue to address both housing creation and the housing of people, again with the partners that we have here this evening. Just because you have housing doesn't mean that you can house people. It's two different sets of problems here. And I thank the audience for coming forward with a lot of the recognition that the majority of the overwhelming majority of the population that we still see unhoused in our community, we've been able to address the economic aspects, the veterans aspects, and such under that. It's the substance use disorder and mental health that we have the most limited capacities in. It continues to be that population that's been out there for the longest period of time, that we have difficulties in them willingly taking services or accepting services, and continue to be our greatest concern. I want to recognize the private developers. The city itself does not build housing. Our private sector developers build our housing, and we have a large continuum of private developers that we know well in our community that continue to invest here in our community, build new rental units and new single-family homes. Again, the broad continuum of housing. We're very fortunate that the City Council, through their goals and objectives, has put a concerted focus on housing. I was very pleased that when LD 2003 came along, they're flailing their arms about housing densities, and because certain communities in Maine have just shut the door down as far as housing, we were not one of those communities. We were embracing the development of housing, because when our city talks about economic development, they talk about workforce development, they talk about housing development, and we talk about childcare, right? It's those four elements that you can't say any one of those without mentioning the other three. It's a concerted package. We do talk a lot at the Homeless Task Force, as well as when we talk about housing, we talk about the Alice report and the statistics that are in there. And when you look at the elements that go into the measurements of the Alice report, housing is the top piece there. Who can afford housing? That is the top element in that. Next comes quality jobs with good pay scales and such, affordable child care, but housing is the key at the top of that. And I used to think housing was a critical component. Somebody in this room has convinced me, Steve, housing is the key to everything. And I think we've heard that time and time again here this evening, that it is the key to everything. We start with housing first, and then we get to talk about all of the other elements that we need for economic development. Charlie Colgan?
Diane says it all the time, and it's good that we keep hearing it.
Yes. So if we could just have Charlie Colgan here, right? There's so many things that it... And we've got Eric sitting in the back. Yeah. Telepathy's coming forward. Inside joke here, folks. But
It's interesting though when you look back at how long it takes,
Yes.
to really turn that around. And based on what Jamie's seeing, based on what Keith is seeing, I think that the housing piece is, as it comes together, and it is, we have a lot of units on the horizon. I think seeing the other businesses coming through is an encouraging sign that we're going to that next corner. So it's nice.
We've been over a decade with this concerted effort of getting to this point now that we can start going, we're being successful when it comes to housing.
It's encouraging, very encouraging.
And I just want to tell quickly, so 30-ish years ago, when Charlie Colgan was standing up at a conference that I was at, the paper mills were going down and people were losing thousands of jobs and such into that, and Charlie Colgan was soon going to run out of labor in the state of Maine. Thinking, you are crazy. He's brilliant. You are crazy. He is brilliant. So we lost him for a while. He's retired now. But he and who's the director of Colby College in Waterville? Yeah, that nobody would listen to, and she was right every time. So, but anyways, so we need to pay attention to some of these brilliant people. But yes, Lori. Yep. Yes, I can picture her. Yep. So that's the drawing conclusions that I get out of this evening's presentation. If there's anything else that I can emphasize is the partnership of the people sitting around the table, that we deal with the Homeless Task Force, that we deal with the housing continuum, that we deal with economic development. So I would thank everybody for being here this evening. I hope this has been helpful for the public and that they can watch this information going forward in the future. And I look forward to our housing workshop again next year. So thank you very much.